Okay, and here we are again today, Shawn Quigley and John Quigley, to talk about project management and learning opportunities, and learning organization and organizational development opportunities along the way. This is Module 3, and Module 3 we're going to talk about project planning and opportunities for your team learning and for team and organizational development. Right, Shawn?
Indeed.
So today this is what the agenda is going to look like. We're going to look at individual and team learning opportunities, just a few examples, the ideas to get you to think about the opportunities in your own environment, team building opportunities in the planning process, individual and team motivation opportunities in the planning process, and the importance of communication throughout. Today, we're going to talk about planning. In the previous slideshow, lecture-ish thing, we had talked about the initiating or inception processes and things you could do there. Today we're going to talk about the processes, the planning process group, a la PMI, and we're going to kind of apply it to, in a project phase we'll call concept. In the concept phase, we're trying to dredge up some ideas about how to go, how this project should attack, or how the project team should attack the objective of the project. The goal is to pick the most probable, the approach that could be most probable for success, that fits the cost, that fits the feature content, or any other of those attributes that the project manager, project team, and the executives deem appropriate. So in the planning phase, we have things like we need a detailed scope. We're going to evoke detailed requirements, WBS, work breakdown structure. We're going to do some estimating. We're going to have to look at material resources, talent. Some people call that human resources. We're going to construct some kind of schedule, hopefully one that's defendable. It has some logic and rationale to it. And in all of those activities, you have an opportunity to build something and learn and to adapt. And that's not just each individual, but that's both organizationally and within a team. Not at the macro level, but not at the micro level, but some space in between for your team to.
All of them.
All of them, yeah. It's not just the individual growth that you're working on here. It's not just building the organization's capabilities or increasing those capabilities or understandings, but it's also the immediate team executing the expectation of the project.
Sometimes, what people forget about with that one too is what is developed in that phase can apply to other projects, so capturing it and sharing it. So not only the project team, the individuals, the subgroups to the project team, but the whole organization can learn from it.
Right, especially if we're talking about some kind of method improvement within the organization or process improvement within the organization. Maybe if it's a design issue, maybe the design issues don't readily transfer to the next project. Maybe they do, but that's kind of as a need, case-by-case basis. But those opportunities should be looked at. You're right. The goal is to spread what you learn as far as you can in the organization.
Indeed.
Like we said, in the planning, we're going to be looking at scope, time, cost, quality, talent, human resources, communications, risk, and procurement. Those are all the pieces that PMI says belong in your planning stage. So you're going to figure out what the scope is and how to manage the scope. You're going to build something. Mostly we refer to that as some kind of schedule, Gantt chart, PERT chart, something like that. Understand the cost, understand the underlying drivers of the project cost, what is the quality and how are we going to go about achieving it, what kind of talent do we need, skill sets, who needs to be talking to who, are any particular risks, because I'm sure there will be, associated with this unique project. And also procurement is an acquisition of materials. Those are also part of opportunities for learning. These are planning activities that you have to account for according to PMI.
So, John, quick on that slide there that we just had up. A lot of people think of the time, cost, quality, and procurement as being a function of the project, not the people. Time could be considered also when you're thinking about it in project planning, is the investment in your people of where you want them to go, how you're going to yield them from where they are now to something more in the organization, something more learned.
That's
okay. Cost could, if you look at cost, it could be the cost of the human capital. What it would cost you if you don't develop your people? What would it cost you if you don't have the right people? Okay, what qualities do you have now in your people? What qualities will you need in the future? So all of this can also be looked at as the development of your people.
Right. Now, some of that might not be attributed to a project. The project may say we're not going to pay for a certain level of a capability within to create a certain level of capability within a person, but the project may very well have to do that. If you find that your list of talent is missing some aspect, some attribute, then you have to find a way to acquire it. Somebody has to put that money in, and a lot of times it is the project that has to foot the bill to bring that person up to speed in some way.
Well, I believe you have it right. A lot of times the project doesn't want to eat the cost, but the organization usually runs on some sort of overhead for their training and stuff like that. And we talk about this later when we talk about costs, so we can defer that until we get to that section. But let's just address the fact that it's like the old Meineke commercial. Pay me now or
you pay me later. Yeah, exactly. And the truth is, if this project surprises your organization with a certain requirement or set of skills that your organization does not already have, that's kind of shocking. Ideally, the organization should be developing the talent all along, independent of the projects, and use the projects as a mechanism to refine an individual's capability, to practice what they should already be learning in some other way.
Yep.
Well, this is an interesting one. I think you should start here, not me.
Well, thank you, John. We've talked about the Hawthorne Effect in many of our blog posts, and we've read numerous articles from other people about the Hawthorne Effect. And for those of you who don't know, they did a study a long time ago about trying to increase productivity, and they come up with all sorts of different stuff that they were surprised about. Like the mere talking to workers caused the workers' productivity to increase. Not even the actions of doing something for them, just walking around and actually engaging them so they felt like a valuable member. Okay, and this, as we previously discussed with Maslow and Hertzberg and a couple of the others, it shouldn't be surprising, but in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, it was surprising to people because it was the factory mentality was being swung away from as we developed into a more evolved group. Okay, so now we take this principle of the Hawthorne Effect of involving people in the decisions and roll it into the planning of a project. Okay, if they're involved in a project in its inception, you have more likely a chance of success than if you just tell them what the plan is. Because then they start feeling ownership in the plan itself. So, and you get more ideas.
Okay, I see Steven has jumped in. Are you there, Steve?
I am, finally.
We had some technical difficulty. I wasn't sure you were going to make it, but...
Oh yeah, I've been trying since Q6 to get into this system, and nothing I did was going to work. So
Wow. Yeah, I guess resetting the password helped us.
yep,
Okay.
yep.
Well, is there anything you want to add to this Hawthorne study?
No.
Okay.
Not.
I want to tell you what. There's one thing I found kind of funny about that whole study was I really want to get the entire study and read it and review it, but they were finding improvement in output under conditions that you would think that would not be true. For example, you elevate the lights and everybody sees better, and their abilities throughput goes up. Right, they can see things better. But if you dim the lights and obscure the viewability a little bit because of dim lights, guess what? It goes up. It still goes up. What? So I mean, it's interesting. Some of the things that are found in there are very odd, and I think I'd like to sit down and read the whole study if I could find the original.
Listen, like I said before, I think a lot of it has to do with, if you go to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just the feeling of being involved in something, even if it's a negative involvement, changes your aspect, which could make you more productive.
And that's more or less what this is saying right here. Drawing your team in during the planning phase can improve the outcome, assuming you have a group of people that can work together. I can tell you personally, when people hand me on high, especially when they don't know how things need to be done or what needs to be done, if they hand me on high how I'm going to do it and what I'm going to do, it bugs me a little bit. How about you, Steve?
That may be why I lose clients. Is that I'm not going to do it that way.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that really isn't going to work, and I don't want my name attached to that.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a tough road to hoe. Okay, so in the beginning part of the project, we're detailing the scopes so we understand what good looks like when we hit the end. We need to know what the objective is, and you'll find all that in a detailed scope. You're going to gather requirements. It means you have to ask questions, do interviews, study things, and you're going to build a work breakdown structure. Anything to add there, Steve?
No.
That's pretty much straightforward, right?
Yeah, it's the detail of all that gets lost.
And when I put this slide together because these are really good opportunities for team learning. The back one here, this is called the Pew matrix, which is just a weighted decision matrix. You can make these things out of Excel, and somewhere on the value transformation website there's a movie example of an unweighted decision matrix. But this one is for comparing design concepts against design attributes or evaluation criteria. Now, in this case, in this column you have something that's lists the attributes of the design or the expectation from the customer or client, and then you have these individual concepts that you're critiquing. And this is done with a team, right? You're comparing it against some baseline design. So instead of having one person sit here and saying how this works, you have a multitude of people taking a look at each one of these attributes and explaining why they think the way they do, which is uncovering assumptions and things like that. And it's a good way of comparing the design, the variety of designs. Or I've even used it in picking a project strategy. This other one here might look familiar to you Agile people. It's planning poker cards, but I like to call it narrowband Delphi. It's based a little bit on wideband Delphi planning poker, in that wideband Delphi you send a bunch of written stuff to some experts, right? And they review the written stuff, they answer questions, they tell you what they think about what's going on, and they send it back to somebody who compiles all of this. and then sends it back out. And eventually you learn something, you come to some kind of anonymous consensus about the design or what you're looking at. In planning poker, you do it a little different. Everybody's given a set of cards that look like this or something like that. And you sit around a table and then you talk about what it is that needs to be done. And everybody picks a card of how long they think it's going to take to do that, or the relative weight or size to accomplish that task. And when you first do that, you see a scattering. Maybe it doesn't look like anything cohesive, right? You have 3 or 4 people and you get 3 or 4 different answers, maybe even radically different. And then you start talking to the individuals. Why did you pick that number? Why do you think it's that much work? Why do you think it's that little work? And you uncover these assumptions, and then you put all your cards back, and then you lay your cards out again. And in my experience, what you tend to see is a clustering of the responses from the people of the team in some area, right? You might start seeing a number of people settling in on 21 and one person that's in the 55 or one person that's in the 5. So you can kind of start to see what the distribution looks like in your team's mind. Might not be true, but at least you're considering that distribution and what the possible outcome could be.
So, John, I'd like to say something on this. So you're talking about the shift of the numbers and an open discussion, okay? That is an open mental model. When you all get together and you're talking freely, the cards give them an into doing this, right? So
Yep.
I had a 10, you had a 50. So why did you have a 50? You're seeking to understand. You're shifting your mental model, or allowing it to be shifted, and trying to shift the other individuals, which will bring you more toward reality.
Yep.
It's what we used to always say. Okay, there's 3 ways to do something: your way, my way, and the right way. It's because you have your opinion on one aspect of it, I have my opinion. It's somewhere in between.
Yep.
And when you do stuff like this, it actually narrows that bandwidth.
Yes.
And it also establishes a rapport between people.
Have you ever used any of these, Steve?
I have not, but what comes to mind is I was involved in a training session with Pritchard, the risk guru from, I think he's in Washington out that way. And all it was probably 20, 25 people in a class at one of the PMI Seminar World things. And he said, okay, I want to paint this room. How long is it going to take you? One guy said 1 hour, and somebody else said an hour and a half. I said 8 hours. And he said, why do you think it's going to take 8 hours to paint this room? I said, well, first thing you haven't told me is you haven't told me, what color I'm using, when do you need it done, how much money do I have to work with, and you didn't say things like, you don't want paint on the ceiling, you don't want paint on the rug, you don't want, and he said, exactly. He said, and I mean, that's what you're trying to drive out is,
right.
You just, there's a lot of things that everybody's going to jump in and do something, and then all of a sudden they go, well, wait a minute.
Yeah. What do I need to tape off and things like that?
Yeah, and I have to get all that stuff together, and the actual painting might be an hour, but prep and then putting in the room back together, moving the furniture around, it's going to be time involved.
So, Steve, have you read Senegi's Fifth Discipline?
I have not. I just did a summary. I did just read a summary of his book, which was about 17 pages long, but I've not read the book.
Yeah, the book's pretty awesome.
The 5 topic areas of the Fifth Discipline, one is systems thinking, and it reminds me of what you were just saying about gathering all the information. You have to understand the system before you can even start working.
Right.
And part of understanding the system is understanding the people that comprise the system. So I just thought it was ironic that you would ask all those questions that try to develop your system model.
I got a question for you, Steve. Were you the oldest guy there?
No, actually not.
Okay.
I was definitely one of the ones with the most experience, though. There were a lot of IT people there who didn't paint rooms, and being on the construction side, I get to be around a lot of painters. So
yeah, that's pretty cool. I like these tools. I like this weighted and unweighted. I've worked with a project manager when I was a test guy using an unweighted one just to kind of figure distribution as a strategy selecting tactic strategy. Yeah, it was a strategy for achieving some objective of the project. We had 4 different alternatives, and I thought, well, we probably need to sit down and look at which one of these is going to be better. What are the big attributes? And you label the big attributes, and then you figure out how each one is good or bad against those attributes, and that can help you figure out what the right way to go is.
Along those lines, do you then have a follow-up that at the end of the project that says this concept worked best, it did what we thought it was going to do, sort of part of the lessons learned in the closeout?
I have to say I haven't been very rigid with that. That would be the best way to close that out. Yeah,
that's the other thing I'm big on is the lessons learned going forward. So that would be it's like if you got with the agile cards, if you got somebody at 5 and a bunch of 21 and you pick 21, I would really go back and note to say, man, we were off a little bit,
Your 21 was the way to go. Now why did we miss that? Why did we all think it was 5 except for the one bullet at 21? Yeah. It doesn't mean if you pick the central tendency, so to say, that you're going to get it right.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But every time you use it, then you're going to fine tune it, get better at it.
Yep. Ideally.
So the irony of us talking about planning and you bringing up lessons learned, you cannot capture lessons learned at the end if you haven't thought about it during your planning phase.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's probably why in the case that Steve asked me about, did I go back and look at that at the end? No, I did not. But if you ask me, the improvement was so obvious that we all should have got it. But maybe not.
It's not uncommon that you can't see the thing that's right in front of you because there's the shiny object behind you.
Right.
Right, and that's a great segue into this right here. So far, what we've talked about getting the people involved and sharing a vision of what the project is. Okay, and I like to talk about mission statement. Okay, and there's 2 parts to a mission statement. A mission statement, since I'm used to working in the military, you just flat out state your objective. Go do this. Okay, this is what we're going to do, and everybody gets on board, hoo-yah, and we go do it. Okay, and we don't have any issues with that. But the other part of the mission statement is a value statement. If you look at tribal leadership, okay, it talks about value statement. What drives you to achieve said mission? Okay, your values of honesty, integrity, you want to better the world for, kittens or whatever. Okay, will drive the way you execute your mission statement or your mission. Okay, but also with a mission statement, if you develop it during your planning phase with your team, you're getting rid of a lot, or you're going through a lot of your storming and your forming that Tuckman talks about in the building of a team. Okay, well, so in the very preceding slides, we talked with Steve, and he brought up the aspect of system syncing. Gathering the information so you can understand the system. Okay, so you want me to paint. What are the parameters of painting? What is painting? What color? How? When? Where? Do you want it all over the carpet and the ceilings? Okay, we also talked about the open mental model, John, when you brought up playing poker to figure out your project plan. Okay, hopefully it's not aces and eights, but we'll have to see at the end of the project, right? in the other part of the plan, where are your opportunities? Okay, not just to succeed, not your risk opportunities, but your opportunities for your people. Okay, and your motivational opportunities even. So you don't really think of that when you're doing a project. You think of, how can I get this project done so I can move on to the next one? You don't think of, how can I motivate my people to work the project? How do I motivate myself? A lot of it's already garnered in the things we've talked about.
Yep.
So this is where we roll the pieces together now.
Some input, Steve?
No.
So time management, a la PMI. This is the things we're going to do. We need to define the activities. We sequence the activities. We estimate resources, estimate durations, and they will end up developing a schedule based on all these things. So the define activities sounds a little bit like your paint discussion, Steve. It could be in a WBS, for example, you have some nomenclature for the item, but that doesn't tell you anything about what that item really is. I've seen very few companies actually have a WBS dictionary associated with the WBS elements, which means
Yeah.
just about anything could hit the target of the whatever the name of this thing is and be construed as okay.
Yep.
And that's part of that systems thinking and uncovering what does it really mean when you say test the software. Does that mean run one test case out of the 1,000 that are appropriate to run on this product? If so, I'm done testing and we're fine. We have reported no bugs after running one test case out of 1,000. If you
So if you look,
go ahead.
Look at it in that aspect, John, just like saying my work breakdown structures across the Atlantic. Okay, where are you going to wind up at? Could be important. If your parameters are so broad like that, you can actually not achieve them even though you have.
Yeah, you think you have, but you really haven't. Another opportunity. Go ahead.
That ambiguity will actually destroy the project and the people that are working for it.
That's not
because there's no way they could ever understand the system.
Yeah, that's
because it's too broad.
Yeah, that's not a morale builder. When you think you're done and somebody says, yeah, that's not it. Yeah, that's not it either. And that's still not it. No, you're still wrong.
Yeah.
Go back and do it again. Yeah. Sequencing activities, those are interesting things too, opportunities for learning. Some dependencies they're pretty obvious. This has to happen before that. I have to put my socks on before I put my shoes on. That's kind of obvious. But some activity sequencing can help you save on your time instead of cutting time out of your schedule on important aspects of your project, like reducing the time collecting requirements or reducing the time to test the product or things like that. You can save time by considering a sequence, those non-mandatory dependencies in some other way. And those ideas can come from anywhere in the team.
Great.
A lot of sequencing would be ran on whether it's a technical tie or resource tie, and that, technical ties, there's not a whole lot you can do about in the way of organizational development. But the resource tie, if you're talking about human resource, is something you could modify.
Yeah.
Technical tie is something that you could possibly modify in some other aspect, but then use your resources to validate whether it was effective or not in your planning.
Yeah. Mandatory dependencies are there. You can't do much about those, but those discretionary ones can help you along the way. We already kind of talked about estimating durations and developing the schedule. Those kind of all those former things tie into that.
Yeah. velocity, okay, defined as the speed of something in a given direction. Speed is distance over time. When you first think about this, you would think, what's that got to do with organizational development or organizational learning? Okay, well, think of it in the change aspect. What is required to facilitate change? There's a dynamic tension between where you are and where you want to be, right? When that tension gets large enough, you take some sort of action. When that tension is small, you live with it. It may be annoying, but you could care less. Okay, because most things in the world do cause some discomfort. If you take your project plan and you figure in how long it will take you to modify where you're at and where you want to be into that project plan, you can use every project and every piece of a project to get you to where you want to go. And by doing it as a group, like we first talked about in your project plan, okay, you can really figure out where you are. If you look at I think it's called the model of change, it says most commonly change fails because of you don't know where you're really starting from. And your assessment of where you want to be is based upon where you think you're starting from. But as we talked about with an open mental model, and we talked about with your playing poker for your project plan, okay, if you share where you think you are with a group with an open mind and get closer to where you think you really are, where you really are and where you really want to be, okay, it'll take less time because you'll be headed in the right speed, in the right direction, than if you just said, I'm in charge of the project, we're going to do A, B, and C, and you don't really have an idea of where you're starting from or where you're attempting to end at.
Yeah.
And we roll back to what you and Steve were laughing at about how good work breakdown structures are. Okay? If your target is so large that the person you're providing your end goal product to can say, nope, that's not it, nope, that's not it, nope, that's not it, then obviously you didn't have good speed and direction.
Yep.
So that's how we roll it in. Any questions or comments?
No.
Yeah, I got to tell you a story. I was working at a company, and they had been losing their configuration and change management across the couple of the silo areas was really terrible, and they were hemorrhaging. And the project was hemorrhaging due to rework and uncoordinated change, right? So I went to go talk to the process guy, and he says, I told him, I said, apparently we don't have a process for managing these changes. And he said, oh yeah, we do. It's an ISO document. I said, well, we're not behaving according to it. And he said, oh yeah, we are. We've been audited. Everybody knows we do this. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm right in the middle of this, and I'm watching millions of dollars go up in smoke.
Yeah.
And your paperwork may be good right there, but it's not between these two groups right here. And that's an example of, you think you're good to go. Hey, we're ISO certified, man. We know this. This is good. Our people act according to this. But your project is going through millions of dollars worth of rework, so there is a disconnect somewhere. It's not what you think.
Yeah. I was on an interview once, and the company talked to me about the fact that they were certified and done that. And I happen to know a couple of people who worked there, which is how I got word about this opportunity. And they said, yeah, they scheduled the audit and the run and ran through everything and made sure that just the projects that were on target, if you will, were audited. But the ones that were in really bad shape were kind of lost in the data somewhere.
Yeah, that's a shame too. Because, yeah, go ahead.
Well, it is. I mean, it's like if you're using it for a sales point, which is sort of what they were doing, it's like you got to audit every project, and somebody should be able to walk in and ask anybody, how's this going? Show me the data. Yep. Are you following this part of the procedure?
Yeah.
The irony of that, when you say it like that, Steve, is wouldn't you rather go and hire a company that says, hey, we're at 90%, but we have a plan to get us to 92, and we've got a plan to follow on that to get us to 93. So a company that you're going to hire, say as a consultant or something, understands they have limitations, but they're trying to grow and develop. Instead of walking to someone going, I have the solutions to all your problems. Look at my certifications. We're never wrong. If you're never wrong, then you're not a consultant. You own everything.
Yep.
So that's snake oil.
Yeah, when I was debating, this will come back to John a little bit on the PMP. When I was debating about doing that, I went to a guy in our company where I was employed at the time, and asked him about it because he had been with PMP for about 4 or 5 years, and he said, honestly, I did it to get a pay raise because every one of his projects that I have looked at were over budget, beyond schedule, being shut down by clients for expenditures. It's like, yeah, you can say I've earned my certificate or certification,
Yep.
but I'm still learning. I'm still applying. You got just what we're talking about here, a learning organization. The rest of the organization has to come along.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not good if you have one expert and nobody else knows the other pieces of the pie.
Right.
It's a team thing. It's like having, you watched the Super Bowl last year. You know why they were able to come back after such a deficit? Because that whole team had talent and they didn't give up.
Right.
Yeah, New England, right? Yeah, they come back and beat Atlanta ridiculously. And it's because the whole team had talent, not just it's not just Brady or whoever was throwing. I can't remember who the quarterback was. I think this was you, Steve. If it was a cost, right?
Let me pull up here a little bit. I'm trying to go back to my notes here just a bit.
Yeah, we got a little dissynchronized there for a little bit, but I think maybe we're starting to accrete around 0 point here.
Yeah. Yeah, now that the team has developed the scope of the project, the budget needs to be developed. The budget will contain all of the costs of the project. This budget will be a very preliminary budget. The team needs to identify all the costs, fixed, variable, direct, indirect, and sunk. We are not going to go into discussing these types of costs. Gathering the cost is a learning opportunity for each member. The understanding of the cost structure of the project.
Yeah. It's the same thing as vetting the scope and asking questions about that. We end up uncovering interesting things about the cost as well, right?
Yeah, and where this and I think I don't have my full slide here, but I think the next piece of this one and maybe the next one were that the learning comes from other team members going out and gathering the data and understanding where it's coming from rather than just throwing numbers around. So they learn individually, they learn about the organization and how they handle where cost and accounting and all those things fall together.
Right. And then the upstream and downstream from them because of those discussions. Right. Yeah.
Yep.
And one of the other things we talked about this with Steve was cost performance and whether the organizational development or personal development, whichever one you're looking at for the project, is embedded in the cost of the project or it's embedded in overhead for the company itself that's executing the project.
Yeah, and I can go either way on that, to be honest with you. But a lot of times, if the company, again, a company usually has a training budget, things of that nature. And if John's got, he's on my project 40 hours a week, and that's what he's in the office at is 40 hours a week, then I'm paying for him anyway. The project's paying for his time and everything anyway. But if he's splitting time, then I'm going to get a little more questionable about where that any formal training comes from. If it's just a conversation, I go down and say, hey, Shawn, I need the latest tracking on where your area is spending money, and it takes 10 or 15 minutes, and as I'm going back, I'm looking over the sheets. That's kind of informal learning, and I may come back with questions or things of that nature. If it's a situation where you say, sit down, I'll tell you where my numbers, now we're getting a little more formalized with our training. Then from a project manager standpoint, I may not eat that cost on my project. That may have to go on a training budget, but it's one of those things you have to understand going into the project. Have you got time in your schedule and budget for formal training, or do you go back to the department managers and say, hey, we're going to have some good opportunities here, but I'm not paying for them?
Yeah. I don't know that I've ever seen a project pick up the bill for that. Many companies, the ones I've been at, I've not seen them surprised by a situation where the project comes due and we're like, oh crap, we need somebody with this skill set, and we don't. So we need to send Fred off to training to be able to do this for this project.
Right.
Usually they're pretty decent at that. They can. Organizations I've worked with can see those things coming, and
Right.
they're part of the department development, and not necessarily the project work. But it could be either way.
Or the other side of that is, John's available to do this job in about 6 months. I can give you John's assistant, who's only been with the company for a year and only out of college for a year, and he can do this job, but it's going to take him twice as long. It's like, okay,
Yep.
We can, as long as you understand that that's going to have an impact on the project budget and all of that, we can take John's assistant,
Yep.
or he'll hold the project for 6 months till he's available.
And then taking the assistant also is another opportunity to extend. Now the assistant has to apply what they have been learning for the last however long they've been my assistant.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you're kind of pushing the organization forward. It might be a little uncomfortable for the assistant, because now they're no longer playing with a net.
Right. That's right.
Okay, so we fed right into, and then this is a great segue, long-term and short-term costs. You guys were talking about the financial costs, whether it's on the project shoulders or on the organization's shoulders or the customer's shoulders, but the cost inevitably comes back to the organization. Okay, in the long term, either you develop your people, you develop your processes, and you get things moving in a better direction, you grow and learn, or you wind up being stagnated, and then you keep failing and doing the same silly stuff over and over again, expecting better. Now, a lot of people look short term, because we'll say a project's a year long, and that's a short term project for some of the larger ones. And you just say, I'll eat that, we won't train on it, but we'll knock it out, we'll get it later. The cost is not only you don't develop your people, but you demotivate them, because they're just looking at stamp, push, stamp, push. If they wanted to work in an assembly line as a robot, then they'd program a robot. Okay, and that brings me to Hertzberg again. I like Hertzberg and the jumping for jelly beans. You cannot train your people to do stuff, or you can train them. You can give them a bonus, which is a short-term fix. 6 months from now, after you say, Steve, I gave you $1,000 bonus for finishing that project on time. Here's 2 more projects. You're in the middle of them, and you think, my God, hey, things were great 6 months ago when I got my bonus check. I'm almost done. You owe me another bonus check. Short-term motivations, repeating cycle.
Right.
It winds up costing them a lot more than a good discussion and development would be on helping you develop to the next tier so you can move onward and upward. A lot of people fear that you'll lose your employee if you develop them too much. I don't see that as a problem. And normally you don't lose them if you mentor and develop them, because you wind up as a loyal group.
Yep.
And that's what. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's can be fairly demotivating, actually. The opposite of that. Yeah, knowing my situation, I left the company not because of monetary reasons. In fact, that was kind of good. It was the thought that I had another 15 years of career, and I was pretty much where I was going to be 15 years later. That was not good.
Yeah.
The same thing goes with the quality as it goes with the cost. To plan the quality, we need what specific steps are we going to take for quality assurance and quality control. That's both at the product, if we're developing a product, and certainly how the project works. And reliability, that's maybe a little more associated with the product. Those kind of things will need a special set of skills and special opportunities for learning how to apply these, or how to discover the ideas that we can put in action to make sure our product hits and our project hits those quality attributes. But in order to do that, you have to sort of know those quality attributes. It's sort of like the discussion earlier about no, that's not it, try again, no, that's not it, try again. I have a story in this one. I was working for a company one time, and they had signed a contract with a supplier to produce a product. It was kind of a complicated product, and they accepted 500 ppm was the failure rate at 0 miles, right? Can be no more than 500 ppm, parts per million, failing at the manufacturing plant. But if you take a look at the constituent parts of the product as designed, it had a part in there that had 500 ppm. Okay? But it had that part 3 times. So if you have a part that had 500 ppm in the product and you had it sometimes 2 and sometimes 3, that meant that you had 1,000 ppm for one category of the product and close to 1,500 for another category of the product. So clearly the quality attributes weren't met even in the design stage. The quality attributes were defined by the purchasing entity. And apparently that did not make it to the design entity. Otherwise, the supplier had signed a contract saying this was going to be okay, and it clearly would not have been.
Right.
So
didn't know the system parameters.
Right. The design engineers said 1,500 ppm should be fine. 1,000 ppm should be fine. The purchasing folks and the quality people associated said, no, we want 500. But neither of those had apparently talked to each other to understand what was really going to happen.
Imagine that. They didn't talk.
Yeah, they probably had to walk to a different room.
Yeah.
All right, so one of the things we've discussed before in a blog post, personal mastery is right out of Snaggy Spit discipline. It's where the individual takes on the growth and development on a personal level and is always trying to get better and always trying to improve. We thought about it for a little while when we were going through this with John and said, hey, what about group mastery? Doesn't the group get together if they're communicating effectively, if they're, following the tribal leadership theory, you get to stage 4 tribe where everybody's trying to get better. And each person feeds off and works with another person, so group mastery occurs, okay? And if you think of it like that, and you have a bunch of groups building an organization, or even at a project level, you have a bunch of divisions building up a project, if they work together, you get organizational mastery. So every part of your system is trying to improve itself and communicating with the next part so they understand the system as a whole. Because what good would it do if you have a group of testing engineers who have personal and group mastery and they're trying to become the best in the world, but the people who supply them the parts to be tested don't give very much concern, and the people on the other side who are assembling it could care less either? That one group serves no purpose.
Yeah, I personally have seen that too, so that's a good example.
Yeah, and were we going to, somewhere in my mind, I thought we were going to put a link in to that blog post that you had on personal mastery?
Yeah, that'll be when we post this, because you can't click it from within here. Yeah.
Okay, all right. I just didn't see it, so I was asking.
I think it might be in Module 3, actually, but if it's not, I might have done that already. I'll have to go back and check.
Yes, you've already done it on the PowerPoint on the training.
Okay.
Since a big blue button, you can't do links inside of the slide with the big blue button.
Yeah, that's the problem there. Also, I believe all three of these exist in the LOLD, I think it's a dictionary that's built up over there as well. So I think they might already be there too. I mean to put it in with the Wikipedia. I'm building up on the wiki for this LOLD PMs thing as well. Okay. So ultimately, it should be there in a couple of spots. Now this applies more than just the project.
Oh, good Lord, yeah.
Yeah, I think this was you, Steve, wasn't it? And
yeah, and I think the again, not reading. Let me see if I can find my little thing here. Oh, come on down. Yeah. Being a member of a team not only has opportunities for organizational development, but also has opportunities for individual growth and career development. For example, if gathering cost information for a budget, a team member may find that identifying and tracking of costs interesting. This may lead to the member looking at changing their career path. Working with the team to understand the scope, define the strategy, tactics, which the project will employ to meet the project expectation, will uncover talent needs for the project. In some cases, informal learning or coaching from those more experienced within the team can help build the talent in a way that not only helps the project, but also addresses the growth for the individual in a way that means future projects will have a larger talent pool from which to draw from.
Yep.
It could also be argued in here. Yeah, it can also be argued, I would think, that the time invested in the individual will be similar to the impact of the Hawthorne study witnessed, that it is an improvement in the performance.
Yeah. I think that's all true.
Yeah, it's I was thinking too that one of the better engineering companies I worked with had a annual performance appraisal that was well documented. It was about 8 pages, and but what that was linked to was when you started each new year, you had goals and expectations for yourself, and you had stretch goals and all that kind of stuff. So part of the performance appraisal came back to how well did you do on those items, and it's part of, at least from my line with being a project manager, was to learn more about how the departments interacted and things of that nature. So if all individuals have that type of performance appraisal, then it could be worked by their department managers and individual growth and their career development, but also in the end, it helps the projects.
Yeah, it shows it's more of a. It attempts to set attributes to the individual, to which a project can say, "I need these sets of attributes for this person." that's
Right.
on my team. And then somebody can go through these documents, or if it's the manager, they know because they've been dealing with the person. They're able to comment, well, if you need those kind of attributes, you don't need John because he's got some of these that you don't want, and you need this guy who has everything that you want, maybe except for this. So
It also feeds right into, if you look back at Maslow with individual growth and career growth, about just higher tiers, right?
Yep.
You lay out in front of someone how they can get to the next tier of the pyramid or rung of the ladder, however you want to call it, then they're more likely to actually attempt to continue to grow and develop to get to that point.
Right.
Which is a great motivator.
yeah, if that's what you're looking for and you're not getting it, that's a problem.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
my favorite quote, knowledge is like a brick. I tell people this all the time, and they go, I don't understand. Everybody says knowledge is power. No. If you're trying to swim and you're carrying a brick, what happens? You sink. It's exactly, share it. Knowledge shared is power. Okay? Putting something together. The three of us have knowledge about all different aspects of a project, different aspects of growth development for people, planning, right? Between the three of us, we could probably build a nice project. Put one of us out there on a windy corner to make a project by himself, and it'd probably be the house of straw when the big bad wolf comes by.
Yep.
So only through these exchanging of ideas during the planning phase will you help to make things better for your people and your project. Because these bricks are laying around every organization all over the place. Organizations aren't built of stupid people.
Not
And they
usually,
forget
no.
this all the time. Yeah, not for the most part. There are some. You have all these talented and knowledgeable people, and you don't bring them in to build that house of bricks. You'd rather make a straw house at the beginning of your project and hope someone comes and fortifies it during the execution. Very poor plan.
Yeah. My experience is also that management may tend to think of people as fungible, as in it doesn't really matter who's doing what, and that's not always true. That's not always true from a motivation standpoint, and it's not always true from a level of expertise. Right? You need this expertise. You can't have that. Well, then I'll get this guy who knows absolutely nothing about it because he has 40 hours available for you.
Right.
And all that kind of plays into this whole discussion here.
Right. I think that's another one of mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't envy you this one.
Well, it really comes down to just the notes that I made were, projects are executed by people. People need and want to communicate, to learn, to share. Project communication is important. Good, clear, consistent communication is paramount for project team success. The other part of project communication is to communicate to the stakeholders of the project or to the outside business. This requires the team to communicate well within the team, so there is good communication with the stakeholders. Through the activity of developing a communications plan, team members have the opportunity to learn that in today's business environment, there are multiple ways to share information. For example, email, text messages, social media, written, and of course, verbal. And the example I had here was I once had a sponsor who only wanted text message updates, including weekly reports. By meeting his need, I learned a lot about writing short, direct text messages and formatting reports, Word and spreadsheet form, to attach to text messages that made sense when the report was open. On the next project, I proposed this method for texting reports to C-level executive stakeholders, and it was agreed to. They thought I was a genius. One executive comment, he read my reports on the airplane or in the airport. No need for paper or his laptop. So it's we have to communicate. We have to clearly, concisely communicate.
Yeah. And that's intra-team or extra-team. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
That's the key. You said clearly communicate. To clearly communicate, you got to know your obstructors. And they say for every communication, there's at least 4 things obstructing. So we're talking right now. It's coming from my brain to my mouth, from my mouth to your ear, from your ear to your brain interprets it. There are 3 chances right there that what we're trying to communicate won't be effective. Now, when you start adding different levels, oh yeah, there you go. When you start adding different levels, you start taking it from the brain to the hand, to the keyboard, to the computer or the iPhone or whatever you're trying to text with or send a message out, and your eyes have to validate what you're typing. You've just tripled the potential pitfalls for your communication.
Yep.
So you've got to be very careful in how and what you say to be as clear and concise.
Yep.
And I tell the young ladies and gentlemen that I work with all the time, so when you get done talking, I say, go back to your office and send me an email, because I'm going to do the same thing to you, saying what we discussed is the following. I said I would do this. You said you would do that. We said we would do these things together. Did I miss anything? And when we sit down and clean it up like that, there have been several times where either I or they had misunderstood what was said. But you clear it up quickly and effectively so you can carry on smartly.
Yep.
Carry on smartly. Exactly. Oh yeah, for me, this is a big one for team development and uncovering mental models or discovering assumptions and things like that. Risk management, that's another big thing for project success, right? The identification of the things that can possibly go wrong or most probably will go wrong, and then some kind of analysis of probability and severity, and then cultivating some kind of risk response, or should the risk come to fruition or seem to be coming to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
And every one of these are, especially the identifying and qualifying, quantifying analysis, those are kind of team related things, a lot like planning poker for setting a schedule. For one, uncovering and which is probably associated with a lot of assumptions, and the quality and quantitative for your perspective says this is a really terrible risk, and somebody else's perspective says this is not much more than a small blip on the radar. Which one of those is right? And then the risk response itself. If you look at PMI's parlance, you need some individual to pay attention to that. Actually, I believe this firmly. I wouldn't need PMI to tell me that. Somebody needs to be watching a particular metric that would predict whether this thing was getting ready to happen or not, rather than let it slam into you full force and then 2 weeks later you find out. And then you try to pick up the pieces after the fact.
Yeah.
I generally think proactive is better. And metrics help you understand whether something bad's getting ready to happen or not.
Well, you could build that into your project plan, just like your training and your development of your people. If that's embedded in your plan and it can help you stop some archetypes that you and I have discussed before, John, like the shifting of burdens, theory of unintended consequence archetypes. If you say, I'm going to do A, B, and C to mitigate this risk at the following points, I'm going to look to see the effectiveness of mitigating that risk. You're bettering what you're doing because now you're embedding it in your plan, just like Steve discussed earlier with you. when you were saying we should have caught that data for lessons learned. If it's embedded in your planning, it's not really an option. So it's one of the blocks on your Gantt chart. And you make it a non-technical tie to gather the following information at this point.
Right.
It'll help you a lot when you're done.
Yep.
And it'll help you make minor course corrections.
And
you said not get blindsided by it, right?
Yeah.
If you wait until the end to figure it out, and we've used this analogy before, I am traveling 1,000 miles from point A to point B. I am off by 3 degrees. How many miles off will I be? Will that be acceptable for my end destination? I can tell you from having sailed across the ocean repeatedly, if you're off by a few degrees and you travel a couple of thousand miles, you can end up in the wrong country.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Yeah.
You have to treat your projects and your planning the same way.
Yeah.
Always looking for, what do they call it? The cross drift. You know what direction, you know what vector you're heading at, how fast you're heading there. But there is a current pushing you a degree every so often. You have to know that change in that vector so you can make the course corrections.
Yep. And for me, the risk response is a good one, opportunity as well. Somebody who's paying attention to a particular set of risks. For example, I have somewhere on the website there's a tool and an explanation of how to use the tool. And an example was, I think I was working with Kim Priest at the time. We have a hardware piece that's outsourced to a supplier, and we have figured out that the supplier has a bumpy track record of delivering on time. So what thing would we need to monitor to see if this supplier was actually delivering close to on time, or we were starting to get in trouble? And we figure, well, it must be SPI, right? Scheduled Performance Indexing. That'll tell us a little something about whether the supplier is doing all right. So we say, okay, if we're measuring that, if it goes below 0.9, then I'm headed for deep water. I might be in trouble. So what we say in this case, we say the supplier must supply update on their SPI every week, for example, and I have to take an action if the SPI goes below 0.9, 90%, or 90 cents on the dollar. If it starts to go below that, then I know I have some trauma, right? So I can already start figuring out what my next actions are going to be before I'm in hell. Right? Yeah. I can start talking to my the person that's sponsoring the project. Hey, we're having something a little rough here. I can get the executives to put some pressure on the supplier, saying, okay, we're going to take some kind of action to make sure this doesn't slip any lower than 0.9, and actually try to drive it back up to 0.95 maybe, or something like that. Right. Otherwise, if you take the action when you find, and that person's learning things all along the way. Otherwise, if you take the action by the time it starts to get 0.85 or 0.8, then you're not going to recover that, and you're probably headed for 0.7 something, 70 cents on the dollar, which is going to be really bad.
Right.
So you embedded that in your project plan.
Yep.
That's what we've kind of been talking about the whole time. You can either have a plan that works, or you can be worked by the plan. The option's yours.
Yep. Yep. It affects everything. Oh. It gives us lots of opportunities here to learn.
Yep.
Yes. So you look at the risk effects in all areas of an organization, the accounting. Obviously, if you missed your targets or you caused something to go wrong, you hurt someone, God forbid, it's going to come with a cost. And I hate it when we say cost, because there's more to it than just monetary, the accounting and cost, stuff like that. There's a human cost, okay? And You hear that term, that human resource capital, even though I understand it, I don't like that term. People are not capital. Okay, they're not cattle. They're not a commodity.
They're not an asset.
They're not an asset. Okay. They're something that's you're privileged to work with them, even if you don't like working with them, because even the people that torture you when you're working are teaching you something.
Yep.
And you should be, in turn, trying to teach them something. And if you have an open mental model and you try to develop yourself as well as others, you'll see that dynamic over time change. Okay? So you got to look at that. So if you were to sum up accounting, assets, personnel, and sales, I think they're all the same thing. They're people. All of those things can become the people of the organization. Okay? So what are the risks to your people for not having learned from the project? To not plan in development embedded in the project for them to move forward, move to the next tier on the hierarchy of needs, okay, to meet some other satisfier or not have a detractor, okay? Not every negative is bad and not every positive is good. Listen to Hertzberg, okay? There's hygiene and motivation, two different things. Just because you don't like the way something occurs doesn't mean you're going to stop doing it. So you've got to look at that during your development. What is the risk to your overall organization and your people if you don't do some form of development during your project planning?
Yep.
I agree with that, but I might, again, I'm a systems thinker, and with the risk affecting all areas of an organization, picking on accounting, if accounting's never bought hardware before, that's really a systems issue a risk that's going to impact the project. Yes, you're going to have people that need to learn how to do that, but I think there's a risk to the project because we have never bought hardware. I'm talking nuts and bolts. We've never bought that before, so we have no idea until we go out and do research that, it's cheaper to buy 100,000 of them than it is to buy two. Until you understand. So I think I agree 100% with you on people and HR and that, but I think there's also that system side that, personnel filling projects or filling positions just to get warm bodies in. Yeah. Sales, I've worked too closely with too many good salesmen who were brought into a system that said, promise them anything and we'll give them what we can, sort of mentality. So I think there's the risk on the systems. That has to be in the project plan as well. Risk number one.
Definitely, Steve. What I was saying is most people automatically go to the systems risk. They don't think about the risk that's associated with not training someone to do a task later on. They're looking at the risk of, if component A fails, how will it affect my project?
Right.
If I'm building on a 7th floor, what kind of stuff do I need to make sure that these risks don't occur? What risk am I going to have to my customer if I just give him some fake parameters?
Right. Those
are commonly looked at in a project. And they'll beat that horse into the ground. But when was the last time you did a risk assessment where they said, well, the risk of not teaching our people the next generation software on project management is this, is yellow 2 or B4, whatever kind of risk chart you're going to use. When's the last time you heard somebody do that?
2011.
Well, that's actually not too bad.
Actually, one of the things that I was involved in with DHL was teaching the organization, the non-project people, about project management, because the DHL really wanted to be a project-focused company. They wanted to run everything based on being a project. So we were teaching that, and they put a lot of bucks into it, only to have it fold because of change of C-level positions. But I agree with what you're saying. It's jumping a little bit ahead on the CAPM. It's like I pushed in at least 2 companies I was in to have all the office people become certified associates in project management, so that when we were doing projects, they understood what we were talking about, what the tools and templates were, why we do what we do in order to make the project more successful.
You have some common language that can be worked. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think there's, it all comes back to follow through by senior management, and that's very lacking at times.
Yeah, that's probably one of the big failures right there. In anything, in LO, OD, or PM.
Absolutely.
And the confluence.
Yep.
A lot of lip service, little time.
Yeah. We'll use the words and hope platitudes work, but you know what? Platitudes don't really work. Deming had a lot to say about platitudes, and
Yep.
it's all fairly accurate. But we'll keep putting the posters up about good things. Okay, so the planning of the procurement, I think that was you, Steve, wasn't it?
Yeah, there are plenty of opportunities for the company and employees to grow in the procurement management activities of the project. We will likely have to review a variety of opportunities for getting the work completed. For example, we may have to go through some make or buy analysis. We may have to audit or review the proposed suppliers, which also presents opportunities for the team to learn. Even before that, we may have to go through, even before that, I lost my place, sorry. Even before that, we may have to have discussions about technical approaches to a project or product that may generate intellectual property for the organization. There have been many times that I have been on a project and the team generated ideas that were out of the box and were then converted to intellectual property for the company.
Nice.
This is part of an individual growth and a sense of accomplishment by those that are part of generating the material as well as the organization. Again, that's the having worked in procurement as a procurement leader. One of the things that you mentioned before, John, about the quality stuff, man, that was one of the things that I really got into, was taking from the construction business to the machinery and engineering side, saying we need to put penalties on these guys because we like using them, is what you tell me, is we like to use supplier X, but supplier X always is late. Well, if he's going to do my project, I want penalties in the contract. So I don't have to worry about a 0.9 SPI. It's like, he's got to have this hanging over his head the whole time. But there's so many activities, and it just opened up a whole new world to me. I had a piece of machinery show up at a site that was damaged, and I told the buyer that I wanted it sent back and fixed at their expense, and they're going to pay for my engineer to come up and make sure that it was taken care of, and they're going to cover all the costs. And he said, we can't do that. I said, get them on the phone. So I got him on the phone, and I told him everything I wanted. And he said, okay. And I said, we've had problems with your machinery before. You crate it up real well, but somewhere along the line in your trucking service, it gets damaged. How come you haven't done this before? He says, nobody's asked us to. So it's like, well, those are the types of things that, you're from as a part of a project team, it's one thing to say, go buy me X.
Yeah.
But if you have to know, don't count on that procurement representative to take care of everything. You may want to learn about what they're doing, particularly the engineers. So great opportunity.
Yeah, that's a great example. I forget who this was. This is you, Steve, right?
Yeah. Procurement activities are the bidding, negotiating, purchasing of project resources. Team members have an opportunity to learn how things are bought by the company. I think that's really all I had to.
Yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory on it, especially in light of your previous story.
Right.
And I think that brings us to the end. This is I'd like to thank you, Steve. It was a little bumpy getting in to start with, but I didn't notice how long you were there. Where before I'd looked up and I saw your silhouette.
Well, I'll kind of pull all that together just by saying that I may have told you the story before, but I love telling it. Is that as a manager, I used to get a report on how many issues my people had with hardware and software in our company, and I had about 60 employees, and every month almost all the high end was abbreviation, and the abbreviation was problem exists between the chair and the keyboard. So tonight I had a problem exist between the chair and the keyboard.
It happens no matter what you do. It's going to come up sometime or another.
Yep.
And usually at the inopportune moments.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm glad you could make it, Steve. Shawn, I'm glad you're here as well. And I'd like to maybe do another couple of them with you guys. Maybe we finish out the rest of the series with this.
Okay.
If you're up for it.
Yep. You're also giving me some ideas too. It's I have to look at your blog and see what kind of things are over there, but all this discussion that the team has to do, I wonder if there's a lot of articles on the internet and things of that nature of what should be in a project plan, not necessarily how do you develop that plan.
Yeah.
And that may be an opportunity for a lesson too, depending on where you want to take, your training area, because there's a lot of nuances to that. It's a lot of questioning and making sure that you're talking to the right people.
Yeah, and making sure whatever you hear gets to the right people as well.
Absolutely.
Even if you accidentally hear something like an impromptu water fountain thing, you're like, oops. Yep. I'm not the guy that needs to know that, but I think I know somebody that does need to know that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You got a good point. There are a lot of books and even PMI, they talk about, here's the pieces you need.
Yeah.
Right.
It's rather mechanical.
They don't give you the puzzle. They don't give you the map to the puzzle. Or like we used to build models together. They hand you a box full of parts and go, here's your model.
Yeah.
They don't tell you much after that, and that's where the things actually get tenuous.
Well, Shawn and I have been kicking around an LOODPM book as well that kind of fits this coursework in some way. So maybe there's some interesting collaborations beyond just this. Call Value Transformation. We can come to your facility or an offsite and teach you some stuff like this: project management, learning organization development, and any of the number of specialties we have offered on our site. And there's some of our contact information. And we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, and have a great day. Everybody say bye.
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 Okay.